Hi everyone, I'm Mindy Mandell, and today is the first video in a series of videos reading together Plato's Statesman. So for this dialogue, I decided instead of using the Loeb translations, which is what I usually use, I'm going to draw from this book here, The Collected Dialogues of Plato. And this is a really nice collection. This is one that I actually have in hardcover, and it's like the first Plato anthology that I ever bought back when I first got into Plato. The one that I have was printed in 1989. There may be even a more recent one. I think it's now actually in paperback. So for those of you who want this collection and you're the kind of if you're the kind of person who likes to have the physical book, you do have that cheaper option. But this one here is from 1961. It's actually not all that different. I checked the table of contents, compared it to the one I have, and it's exactly the same. Page numbers are a little bit different, but it's the same dialogues in the same order with the same translators. So for those of you who are happy with the PDF, there is a link in the description box to take you to where you can download the same PDF that I'm using here. So what we're going to be looking at is the Statesman, and we can see the translator's name is J.B. Skemp, and this is a really nice translation. I think it reads very well, very smooth. And so just to give you a little bit of the setup, there is a bit of an order here to a bunch of dialogues here. So there was the Theaetetus, which had Socrates talking to a teacher named Theodorus, who was a mathematician, and he had one of his students there, a boy named Theaetetus. And Socrates ended up in a long dialogue with Theaetetus, and the dialogue, of course, named after the young boy. Now, at the end of that dialogue, they agreed to meet the next day, and they met somebody who was, excuse me, I'm sorry, there was some noise outside, but they decided to meet the next day, and at that time, Theodorus introduced Socrates to a visitor from Alea, and they had a little discussion where Socrates introduced the idea of some confusion that sometimes comes up between the sophist, the statesman, and the philosopher. And so they decided to explore those three people. The first one they explored was the sophist, and so that's the dialogue sophist, and I covered that one recently. You can find that on my site. And now we're going into the statesman. Okay, so this one is following, it's the same day, actually. They're continuing their conversation. And so that's where we pick it up. So it opens with Socrates saying, Theodorus, I am really very much indebted to you for my introduction to Theaetetus and to our guest from Alea. He says, good, but you are likely to be 3 times as much in my debt, Socrates, when they have done their task and defined the statesman and the philosopher, as well as the sophist for you. 3 times as much? Really, my dear Theodorus? Must it go on record that we heard our greatest mathematician and geometer say that? What do you mean, Socrates? Are we to say that we heard you reckoning all these 3 as equal value, when their real values differ to an extent that defies all your mathematical expressions of proportion? I want to pause here for a moment because the word proportion is analogia in Greek. And this word is sometimes translated as analogy and sometimes as proportion. And analogy, of course, runs all through our metaphysics and the hierarchy. But there's also this idea of a symbolic distance between, say, the tyrant and the philosopher, or the sophist and the philosopher. There'd be a symbolic distance between them. It's greater than the sum of its parts kind of thing. And so there's this idea of measurement. And measurement, we're going to see, is a key idea in this dialogue. So there's a bit of foreshadowing here. And so I wanted to point that out to you, that this idea of measurement is implied here, that they're not all of equal value. and there is a measurement that you have to understand. Well, Theodorus says, by Ammon, god of Libya, well said, Socrates, and a fair hit. Your dropping on my blunder and calculation like this shows that you have really remembered your mathematics. But I will have my revenge for this some other time. Now, sir, we turn to you. Pray do not tire of favoring us with your assistance, but go on to define the statesman or the philosopher, whichever you prefer to seek. And the stranger, and of course, stranger is the word they use for guest, he says, yes, we must do that, Theodorus. We have set ourselves to the task, and now we must not withdraw from it till all of our definitions are complete. But we must also consider Theaetetus here. What ought I to do about him? In what way? Shall we give him a rest from philosophical wrestling and take on his fellow gymnast, the young Socrates, in his place? Or have you any other suggestion? And Theodorus says, no, take on young Socrates this time, as you suggest. They're both young and will be better able to carry through stiff exercise by being rested in turn. Now, of course, this young Socrates is someone who shares the same name as the Socrates we're all familiar with, not the same person. But our Socrates jumps in here and says, furthermore, sir, they might both be said to have some sort of kinship with me. Theaetetus, according to you, is like me in looks, and Socrates here bears the same name. Sharing a name entails kinship in some sense, and of course we ought always to seize opportunities of discovering those who may be our kinfolk by conversing with them. Yesterday I joined in discussion with Theaetetus. That's the dialogue Theaetetus. Today I've listened to him answering you. That's the dialogue sophist. He too must be tested, meaning the young Socrates. So he shall reply to me another time, but this afternoon let him answer you. Very good, Socrates. You hear what Socrates says? And young Socrates says, yes, I do. Do you agree to his proposal? Yes, certainly. And so from here, the dialogue is pretty much all the way through up until the very, very last comment of the dialogue is all the way through a dialogue between the stranger and young Socrates. Okay, well, evidently you're putting no obstacles in the way of our advance, and I think I am still less entitled to do so. Well then, after finding the sophist, the task we now have to face together is to search out the statesman, or so it seems to me. Tell me then, Socrates, whether he too must be classified as one of those who possess some kind of expert knowledge, or must we begin with some other kind of definition? No, he is to be defined as a kind of expert. Well then, must we distinguish the forms of knowledge as we did when looking for his predecessor? It would seem so. But the line of cleavage required now appears to differ from the previous one, Socrates. What then? It follows another division. It may well be so. Where shall a man find the way of the statesman then? For we must distinguish this path from all the rest by setting upon it the special sign of its distinctive form. All roads divergent from it we must mark out also as one common class. Thus we must bring our minds to conceive of all forms of knowledge as falling under one or the other of these two classes. And the two classes he names are statecraft and knowledge other than statecraft. This must be your task, sir. It is not for me to attempt it. Yes, but it will be your achievement as well, Socrates, when all becomes clear to us both. It is kind of you to say so. Then consider the science of number. and certain other sciences closely akin to it, are they not unconcerned with any form of practical activity, yielding us pure knowledge only? That is the case. But it is quite otherwise with carpentry and manufacture in general. These possess science embodied, as it were, in a practical activity and inseparable from it. Their products do not exist before the arts come into operation, and their operation is an integral part of the emergence of the product from its unworked state. True, what of it? You must use this distinction to divide the totality of sciences into two classes. Name the one applied and the other pure. Okay, so they already had made a distinction, but now it seems he's canceling that out, and now he's starting with applied and pure. So again, you can question if there's a bit of sophistry still at work here, and we'll see that it's going to eventually change. But he's still maybe transitioning, I think, from the dialogue sophist, where the whole thing all the way through was quite a bit of sophistry. And you'll see here as well, a lot of these categories are going to leave you scratching your head. Are we then to regard the statesman, the king, the slave master, and the master of a household? I'm sorry, I skipped a line. Young Socrates replied to that, I agree. Let your distinction be drawn, and let all science be divided into these two parts. Are we then to regard the statesman, the king, the slave master, and the master of a household as essentially one, though we use all these names for them? Or shall we say that 4 distinct sciences exist, each of them corresponding to one of the 4 titles? But let me put this in another way, easier to follow. What is that? I will tell you. Suppose we find a medical man who is not himself practicing as a public medical officer, but who nevertheless is competent to advise a doctor actually serving in that capacity. Must not the expert knowledge the advisor possesses be described by the same title as that of the functionary whom he is advising? Yes. Well then, consider a man who, though himself a private citizen, is capable of giving expert advice to the ruler of a country. Shall we not say that he possesses the same science as the ruler himself possesses, or rather ought to have possessed? We shall indeed say so. But the science possessed by the true king is the science of kingship? Yes. And the possessor of this science, then, whether he is in fact in power or has only the status of a private citizen, will properly be called a statesman, since his knowledge of the art qualifies him for the title, whatever his circumstances. Yes, he is undoubtedly entitled to that name. So the important thing to look at here is that we have a category here, a kind of, it's not highlighting correctly, ship. I want to highlight just that suffix. This tells that whenever we use ship, it has a number of meanings. It could be this category of people. It can have, and it has to do oftentimes with their knowledge or their skill. And that's what we're looking at here. Kingship is that study, that knowledge, that category. And it doesn't matter if you're actually functioning as a king or not. If you have that knowledge, we would call that kingship. And so that's what he's saying here, that it doesn't matter. His knowledge of the art qualifies him. Let me highlight that and see if it'll work. No. Sorry, never mind. Okay, his knowledge of the art qualifies him for the title, whatever his circumstances. Then consider a further point. The slave master and the master of a household are identical. I don't think many people would agree with that today, but we're going to see a way in which they are. Furthermore, is there much difference between a large household organization and a small-sized city, so far as the exercise of authority over it is concerned? None. Well, then, our point is clearly made. One science covers all these several spheres, and we will not quarrel with a man who prefers any one of the particular names for it. He can call it royal science, political science, or science of household management. Young Socrates agrees, it makes no difference. Now comes another point that can hardly be controversial. What a king can do to maintain his rule by using his hands or his bodily faculties as a whole is very slight in comparison with what he can do by mental power and force of personality. Manifestly. So a king's art is closer to theoretical knowledge than to manual work, or indeed to practical work in general? Yes. You agree, then, that we may speak either of statesmanship and the statesman, or of kingship and the king, these terms being convertible, since they are identical in force. Okay, so there's also kind of an analogy being set up here that the statesman is, or statesmanship is to the statesman as kingship is to the king. And he's also using them interchangeably there, that there's the same relationship, that statesmanship has to the statesman. You can also use the language of kingship and king. Certainly. Let us go on to the next stage and see if we can proceed to a division of the kinds of theoretical knowledge. Good. Look attentively then, and see if we cannot discover a natural cleavage within such knowledge. And this word natural is actually quite key here. And we're going to get some advice as we go on as to the natural way to cut and what is not a natural way. Okay, where it is. Tell me where it is. Where is that natural cleavage? See, it is here. There exists, we agree, an art of counting. Yes, that belongs quite definitely to the class of theoretical sciences, I presume. Of course. Now, when the art of counting has ascertained a numerical difference, we do not assign it any further task, save that of pronouncing on what has been ascertained, do we? No. But now consider a master builder. In other translations, it's sometimes architect here. No master builder is a manual worker. He directs the work of others. Yes, he provides the knowledge, but not the manual labor. True. So he might fairly be said to possess one of the theoretical forms of science. He might indeed. But it is characteristic of him that when he has delivered a verdict on the facts, he has not ended his task in the way the calculator has. The master builder or the architect must give the appropriate directions to each of the workmen and see that they complete the work assigned. That is so. Therefore, all this class of sciences are quite as theoretical as calculation and its kindred sciences are, but the two groups differ from one another in that the latter are content to give a verdict, but the former issue a command for performance of further actions. This is clearly the difference between them. Well then, may we claim that it is a sound division to split the whole of theoretical science into two parts, and to call one critical and the other directive. Yes, I would agree to it at any rate. I hope so, for it is much to be desired that those sharing a task should be of one mind. Indeed it is. So long as we ourselves share this noisy car again. So long as we ourselves share this happy agreement, we can let the judgments of the rest of the world look after themselves. Yes. Well then, in which of these groups of sciences do we find a place for the king? In the critical class, as though he were a mere spectator of truth, is he not rather in the other, directive class? Does not his position and control of men imply this? Of course he is in the second group. Good. But we must now look further at the directive class and see if we find a cleavage in it somewhere. I think I have lighted on one. There is a difference between kings and heralds, analogous to the difference between the art of the producer salesman and that of the retailer. So again, notice he's setting up another analogy. The king is to the herald, as the art of the producer salesman is to the art of the retailer. Now he has to open that up and explain it, but that's the analogy that he is now looking at. So young Socrates asks him, how so? How is that analogy correct? Retailers take over what someone else has made and then sell a second time what was first sold to them. Quite so. Similarly, heralds receive commands which have been thought out and issued by someone else. Then they issue them at second hand to others. Very true. Well then, are we going to confound the science of kingship with the science of the interpreter, the coxswain, the prophet, or the herald, or with any of this large group of kindred sciences, simply because all of them are concerned, as admittedly they are, with issuing orders? We thought out an analogy just now. Cannot we think out a name as well, seeing that unfortunately there is no normal description of the general class of givers of first-hand orders? We will make the cleavage at this point and name a pre-directive class into which we will put the race of kings. The other class, now distinct, we can neglect them, leaving it to someone else to invent a further common name for the tribes that it covers. It is for the king we are searching, not for his opposite. Exactly. Well then, his group has been distinguished from the others, the decisive factor being that the kingly group issues its own commands, while the other group merely passes commands on. Now we must subdivide the kingly group if we find it susceptible of a division. We must look for one. Yes, and I think I have found one. Keep close to me and share the work of dividing. Well, where is the division? Take any ruler we may observe at his work of issuing orders. Is not the purpose of his action the production of something? Of course. Products in general need not detain us. They are easily divided into two classes. How? Considering them as a whole, we find some lifeless and the rest alive. Yes. By this distinction, we can divide, if we wish to do so, the directive group of theoretical sciences. Okay, so now he's been making divisions. He's going to make a whole list of them. It's the theoretical sciences. It's the directive group of the theoretical sciences. Now we're going to make another division. We're looking for working with people who are alive in the directive group of theoretical sciences. One thing I would suggest here as you're reading this is that while we are getting some rules of division, you can also ask yourself, does this really help you understand what the statesman is? This question I'm asking now is going to come up later, so it's going to come into question. Is this really the way to go, or is there something else we need to be looking at? Okay, but by this distinction, lifeless and alive, we can divide, if we wish to do so, the directive group of theoretical sciences. How? We assign one section to superintendence of the production of lifeless things, the other to superintendence of the production of living things. This effects an exhaustive division of the group. Well, yes, it does. Let us put aside the one section and taking the other as our unit, divide it into two. Which of the two sections do you suggest that we take for subdivision? Well, surely the section concerned with the issue of directives about living creatures. It goes without saying that the king is never concerned with directives concerning lifeless things in the way the master builder or the architect is. Kingship is a nobler thing. It works among living creatures, and its functions have to do with these alone. True. Now, the breeding and nurturing of living creatures can be seen to be of two kinds. They may either be reared singly or in flocks collectively. They may. But we shall certainly not find the statesman to be a man in charge of one creature like some cowman or groom. He is much more like a man in charge of a whole herd of cows or of a stud of horses. Well, that is quite clear once it is put as you have now put it, or as you have put it now. How shall we describe the section of the art of rearing living things which has to do with rearing them collectively? Okay, so that's our next division. We're dealing with the collective. Shall we call it herd nurture or collective nurture? Young Socrates says that we can use whichever name better helps our argument. Excellently said, Socrates. If you hold fast to this principle of avoiding contention over names, you will be seen to be rich with an ever greater store of wisdom as you come to old age. We will apply this sound principle to the present case and do as you bid me. Do you see how we can divide the nurture of herds into twin sections so as to cordon off the object of our search in one of them and leave him an area only half the size of the one he is free to roam in at present? I will try my hardest to cordon him off. I think the division is to be made between nurture of men and nurture of beasts. Okay, before we look at that, I do want to go back to what the stranger just said here, because this is a principle that we see in many of Plato's dialogues, that he doesn't want to be pedantic just for the sake of being pedantic, of being precise. There are times when he is very careful with his language, but if you're communicating and you're making your point clear, especially as you're setting up an example like this one, it's more important that you're communicating. And so this idea of avoiding contention over names, it may seem on one level like he's being really imprecise and sloppy, but there's a reason for it. There are things we don't have to define, and we want to really just single in on what it is that we are considering, right? And so as long as you're communicating, there are sometimes we can be a little sloppy. There are times when, or a little, I shouldn't say sloppy, we can be a little loose with our language as long as we're communicating well, but where misunderstandings come in, that's where we have to start tightening up the language. Okay, but we want to be precise without being pedantic. I think that's a good way to say it. And so that's the principle he's referring to here. So squabbling over definitions just for the sake of a definition is not what philosophy is really about, at least not the way Socrates and Plato are doing it. Okay, so young Socrates suggested dividing between the nurture of men and the nurture of beasts. You were keenness itself, and you fenced the keen off like a man, but I think we must not let this happen again if we can help it. Why? What has happened? What have we done? Okay, so the one time this young Socrates speaks up, he's admonished for it, and we'll see why. We must beware lest we break off one small fragment of a class and then contrast it with all the important sections left behind. We must only divide where there is a real cleavage between specific forms. I want to highlight the words real cleavage, but it doesn't seem like I can. All right. The section must always possess a specific form. And actually, I'm going to do my best to highlight that because that's a key line. Now, in reality, when we're doing dialectic, it's not between categories like what he's doing here. It's among the forms, the absolute realities, the real beings, the forms, the ideas, the eidos. That's where dialectic really functions. These are, you might see them as examples. That would be the best way to put it, that these are examples of dividing, but true dialectic is only among the absolute realities. It is splendid if one really can divide off the class sought for immediately from all the rest. That is, if the structure of reality authorizes such an immediate division. You had such direct tactics in mind just now, and hastened the argument to its conclusion. You saw that our search led us to men, and so you thought you had found the real division. But it is dangerous, Socrates, to chop reality up into small portions. It is always safer to go down the middle to make our cuts. The real cleavages among the forms are more likely to be found thus, and the whole art of these definitions consists in finding these cleavages. I don't know why the D and the E lit up as well, but anyway, so there he's giving you some more advice that you can carry with you in your actual work with dialectic. What do you mean, sir? I will try to be still clearer, Socrates, for you are the kind of person it is a pleasure to teach. A fully satisfactory demonstration is not possible now, circumstances being what they are, but we must try for the sake of clearness to push the explanation a stage further. Thank you, but what kind of mistake do you say that we made in our division just now? The kind of mistake a man would make who, seeking to divide the class of human beings into two, divided them into Greeks and barbarians. This is a division most people in this part of the world make. They separate the Greeks from all other nations, making them a class apart. Thus they group all other nations together as a class, ignoring the fact that it is indeterminate. It is an indeterminate class, made up of people who have no intercourse with each other and speak different languages, lumping all this non-Greek residue together. They think it must constitute one real class because they have a common name, barbarian, to attach to it. Barbarian is we don't like that word in modern English. They just mean foreigner. I think it would be better to read it that way. Take another example. A man might think that he was dividing number into true classes if he cut off the number 10,000 from all others and set it apart as one class. He might go on to invent a single name for the whole of the rest of number, and then claim that because it possessed the invented common name, it was in fact the other true class of number. Number other than 10,000. Surely it would be better and closer to the real structure of the forms to make a certain division of number into odd and even, or of humankind into male and female. A division setting Lydians and Phrygians or any other peoples in contradistinction to all the rest can only be made when a man fails to arrive at a true division into two groups, each of which, after separation, is not only a portion of the whole class to be divided, but also a real subdivision of it. Okay, and so categories like odd and even would be valid, right? Male and female is another example he gives. Okay, so we're dealing with true reality. Quite so, sir, but this is just the difficulty. How can one learn to distinguish more clearly between a mere portion and a true subdivision and recognize them as being really different? My dear Socrates, this is no light order. We have already strayed rather too far from the argument set as our task. And here you are asking that we stray still further. For the moment, let us go back to the argument as is only right. We will get on the track of your problem some other time when we are free to do so, and then we will follow it out to the end. But there is one caution I will add here. Do you suppose that in what I say now, I have given you a full explanation of the principle? What principle do you mean? And so here we're getting another principle. It's more of an underlining than a highlighting. The principle that a portion and a subdivision of a class are not identical. And so this is good advice to hold on to. That just because it's a portion, this is a nice summary of that long paragraph we just saw on the previous page here. A nice summary of it is taking a portion of it may not necessarily be a class. It may not carry within it something that is real and eternal. So a portion and a subdivision of a class are not identical. Can you be more explicit? Where a true subdivision of a wider class is made, this subdivision must necessarily also be a portion of the total class of which it is declared a subdivision. But the converse is not true, since a portion is not necessarily a true subdivision. You can claim my authority, Socrates, for asserting this and for denying the contrary. This ruling will be followed, he says. Good. Now help me to settle the next question. What is that? Consider the class which caused us to stray from the argument and brought us to this point. I think that the trouble began at the moment when you were asked how we were to divide the science of tending herds, and you answered with alacrity that there are two classes of living creatures, one of them being mankind, and the other the rest of the animals lumped together. True. It became clear to me then that you were breaking off a mere portion, and that because you were able to give the common name animals to what was left, namely to all creatures other than man, you thought that these creatures do in actual fact make up one class. Yes, that was so. But, my gallant young friend, pray consider this. This kind of classification might be undertaken by any other creature capable of rational thought. For instance, cranes are reputed to be rational in this way, and there may be others. They might invest themselves with a unique and proper dignity, and classify the race of cranes as being distinct from all other creatures. The rest they might well lump together, men included, giving them the common appellation of the beasts. So let us try to be on the watch against mistakes of that kind. How can we avoid them? By not attempting too general a division of the class of living creatures. We shall be less liable to such errors if we avoid this. Indeed, we must not do it. No, for it was here our mistake was made just now. What precisely was it? The directive section of theoretical science, insofar as it directs the rearing of living creatures, was our concern. But we added the rearing of them in herds. That is so, is it not? Yes. This last element of the definition, rearing in herds, implied a prior division of all living creatures according to wildness and tameness. That idea came up, by the way, in the Sophist as well. You may recall if you've read that dialogue before. Types amenable to training and control we call tame animals. Those resisting control, wild animals. True. Now, it will be conceded that the science we are hunting down has always been and still is one that works among tame creatures. Furthermore, it is to be looked for among tame creatures which are gregarious. Yes, so there's a new category, gregarious. Let us avoid making divisions in the way we did just now, in a desperate hurry, and with our attention fixed only on the whole class. Only thus shall we reach the statesman in good time. This statesman's art has already landed us in the situation the proverb warns us against. Which proverb is this? More haste in our work of correct division has meant less speed for us. Young Socrates replies that even though it has slowed us down, it has been a happy mischance, sir. That may be so, but now let us try again from the beginning to divide the science of collective rearing. It may well be that the argument itself, as we proceed with it, will show you more clearly the very thing you are in such eagerness to discover. Answer me this. What? I want to know if you happen to have heard people speak of something you can hardly have seen for yourself. Herds of tame fishes. I know you have not been to see them in the aquariums in the Nile or in the great king's ponds, but you might possibly have seen such fishes in ornamental fountains yourself. Of course I've seen them, and I have heard many people speak of the others. It is the same with the flocks of tame cranes and tame geese in Thessaly. You have never toured the Thessalian plains, but you have at least heard of them, and you believe that such flocks exist. Yes, of course. My reason for asking you all this is to show that the creatures reared in herds may be of two kinds. Some live in water, others live on land. Yes, I agree. Have I your agreement then that we have to divide herd rearing? Have I your agreement then that we have to divide herd rearing on this principle into two sections? May we assign one subdivision to each of these subsidiary sciences and call the one water herd rearing and the other land herd rearing? Again, I agree. One need hardly ask to which of these sciences the kingly art belongs. The answer is obvious. Of course. The next subdivision of the land herd rearing section of herd rearing can be made by anyone. How? By dividing it between walkers and flyers. Oh, yes, of course. Now, hopefully, as you're following along with this, you too are asking yourself, is this really the way a philosopher would define the statesman? Okay, please hold on to that question. We want to divide them between walkers and flyers. Oh, yes, of course. Well, then, is not the statesman art to be sought among the arts dealing with walking herds? Do you not think that practically everyone, even the most witless, would judge this to be so? Yes, I do. Then we must effect a subdivision of land herd tendence into two parts, just as we recently divided number into two. Clearly. But see what has happened. In the region into which the argument has moved, we see two paths lying before us, inviting us to our goal. One path reaches the goal more quickly, but it divides off a small class from a larger one. The other is a longer way round, but it observes the principle we enunciated before, that we should always divide down the middle where possible. We can go on by whichever of these paths we prefer. Is it impossible to take them both? To take both at once is impossible. That is an amazing suggestion, Socrates. But obviously you can take the first one and then the other. Then I vote for taking the first one way, then the other. That is easy, for there is not much farther to go. At the outset or halfway, your command would have been difficult for us to obey. But since we are nearly there and you desire it, Let us take the longer path first. We shall get to its end more easily now while we are fresher. See this division then. Tell me what it is. We find a division of tame, herded, walking creatures, ready-made in nature. What is it? Some have horns, the rest have none. Another important subdivision for finding the Statesman. Right? That is evidence. Divide then the science of rearing walking herds into 2 sections, assigning each its sphere. But use a general description in doing so, for if you are anxious about naming each, the business will be complicated needlessly. How shall we state the matter then? We will say this. The science of rearing walking herds has been divided into 2. The one section of it is assigned in rearing horned herds, and the other to rearing hornless herds. The division shall stand in these terms. In any case, there can be no further question about it. See now, our king stands out clearly once more. He is shepherd of a hornless herd. Unmistakably so. Let us divide up this herd into its component parts then, and try to assign to the king the place really belonging to him. By all means. Where shall we divide it? By distinguishing whole-hoofed and cloven-hoofed, or inbreeding and non-inbreeding? Which do you prefer? You understand what I mean, I suppose. About what? You know that horses and asses are capable of interbreeding. Yes. But all other tame hornless herds are incapable of interbreeding. Of course. What of the statesman then? Is the herd he has in his charge capable of interbreeding with another or incapable? Incapable, of course. This group we must now divide again into 2, as before, it would seem. Yes, we must. But the class of tame, gregarious, living creatures has always been reduced to its component elements, save for the division of 2 of these from each other. For dogs cannot claim to be counted in the class of gregarious animals. No, they cannot. But by what means are we to separate the remaining pair? By a method very appropriate for application by Theaetetus and yourself, seeing that both of you are geometers. What is that? I would say by the diagonal, and secondly by the diagonal of the diagonal. What do you mean? What say you of our human constitution? How is this human race of ours endowed? So far as its peripatetic potential is concerned, is it not very like the diagonal? Has it not a potency of 2 feet? So it has. Moreover, the character of the remaining component of the class is in turn the potency possessed by the diagonal of our human diagonal, since its native peripatetic potential is 1 of 2 feet twice over. Of course it is, and I think I see what you are meaning to say. Good. Now here's another conclusion which we have reached by our division, which is not without its interest for the comedians. By the way, there he's talking about being a 4-legged animal or 2-legged. Now here's another conclusion which we've reached by our divisions, which is not without its interest for the comedians. Do we see it, Socrates? What is it? For neighbor and competitor in the race, this humanity of ours has the most portly and the most easygoing of all the creatures. Yes, I see. What a funny coincidence. Still, isn't it reasonable after all? The slowest shuffle in, or snuffle in, last. Yes, of course you're right. But there's another thing to notice. What a funny situation the king is in. He has kept pace with his herd, and so he has been running a race with the man who is of all men best trained for living an easy life. Yes, just so. This is a still clearer illustration of the principle we laid down in our inquiry concerning the sophist. What was that? That in a philosophical search for a definition like the present one, the presence or absence of dignity in the object under definition is an irrelevance. Lowly and exalted must receive equal consideration, and the argument must proceed by proper stages in its own right to reach the truest conclusion obtainable. Young Socrates says that seems to be right. Well now, am I to lead you without waiting for you to ask me, along the shorter of the roads which we discovered as leading to the definition of a king? So remember, there was the longer road and the shorter road. Do so, please. In my opinion, then, we must start from the point we reached by separating out herded creatures on land, and this time divide this forthwith into two-footed and four-footed. We shall then see the human race sharing the occupation of the two-footed class with the winged tribes, and none else. Having observed this, we shall divide the two-footed herds into winged and wingless. Then the science of shepherding mankind will have been brought to light. Now we must bring our statesman and king and set him over this class like a charioteer, and hand over to him the reins of government of the state, for they belong to him, and his alone is the art of government. So he's talking about shepherding mankind. And apparently these are wingless, two-legged creatures. So I guess he also shepherds penguins as well. Young Socrates says, "Your debt to me, sir, is nobly discharged by the definition you have made, and you have more than paid the debt, for you have thrown in the digression by way of interest." So he got interest on his account here. So you can question a lot of that, of what was the point of that whole section. And a lot of this is, I'm not making that many comments in this first opening part here, but there is a lot here that is setting things up. And this whole idea of measurement, again, is going to come into play very soon and throughout this dialogue. Come then, let us gather up the threads of our argument and work out from start to finish our definition of what is called political science. Let us do so by all means. We made a first division of theoretical science by taking the directive part of it. Of this we took the part which we describe by analogy, with the producer-salesman as pre-directive. From this pre-directive science, we cut off that which directs the rearing of living things, a very important part of the whole. Animal rearing was divided, and we chose out of its rearing in herds, and next to this, rearing of herds of creatures that live on land. Dividing this again, we chose rearing of hornless herds. We then took a part of this, and if one must employ its name, it will be a name 3 words long: non-interbreeding herd tendons. As for the further divisions, only the class man tendons is left in the two-footed section of the last named class, and so we reach the object of our search, namely statesmanship or kingship, which is another name for statesmanship. You can question if this is really true, and you're going to see that they're about to question that very soon. Yes, but at this point, young Socrates says, yes, we really have reached our conclusion. Do you really think so, Socrates? Do you think our task as complete as you make out? Why do you ask? Haven't we dealt fully with the problem, or have we dealt fully with the problem we were given to solve? Is there not a fault, and a very grave one, in our treatment of it? The fault of arriving at a definition of a king, but failing to work through to a really complete and adequate definition. Okay, so here's where it picks up. So now we can start to see that, there was a reason for all of that first part. Why did he go through that? As you're reading it, and certainly as I was reading it, I'm wondering, why is he going through all this? And here we're seeing that he's getting to it, that you didn't really get to the point of what kingmanship is or what statesmanship is. I will try to make my meaning clear to myself as well as to you. Do so, please. We found just now many arts of herd attendance, of which statesmanship is one particular instance. Statesmanship is in charge of the rearing of a particular kind of herd. Yes, our argument defined it as the science of the collective rearing of men or women, as distinct from the rearing of horses or other animals. Quite so. But we have to notice one respect in which a king differs from all other herdsmen. What is that? Do we find any other herdsman challenged by a rival who practices another art and yet claims that he shares with the herdsman the duty of feeding the herd? How do you mean? You see how merchants, farmers, and all who prepare the grain for food, yes, and teachers of gymnastics and doctors as well, would all dispute the title, feeders of mankind, with the herdsmen we have called statesmen. These others would all contend that they are in charge of the feeding of mankind, and of feeding the leaders themselves, as well as the mass of the herd. Would they not be quite right? Maybe. We will consider this point further, but we can say at once with certainty that no one else disputes a cowherd's position in any of these matters. He feeds his herd himself, and he is also its doctor. He is its matchmaker too, one might say, and none but he understands the midwife's duties when confinements occur and babies have to be brought into the world. Furthermore, in so far as his charges feel a need for games and music, who so good as he to chair them? Who so gifted to charm and soothe them? For he is master of the music best suited to his herd, be it rendered on the pipes or in song unaccompanied. And so it is in the case of every other herdsman, is it not? Certainly it is. How then can the definition of the king reached in our discussion show up as correct and flawless in the light of these new facts? We are claiming that he alone is herdsman and shepherd of the human flock, but we are merely singling him out as such from a host of competitors. Well, certainly this will not do. Then we were quite right to feel anxious a little while ago when the suspicion came over us that though the figure we described was a kingly one, we had not yet achieved a real portrait of the statesman. We might well hesitate, for we cannot reveal him finally in his proper quality till we have removed and put apart from him the throng of rivals that crowds around him and claims to share his herdsmanship. And this word quality is key, because the earlier definition that we got from dividing land animals from water animals or two-footed animals from four-footed animals, it doesn't give us the quality of the statesman. We must aim at a complete description, Socrates, unless we are to bring disgrace on our argument in the end. Yes, for we must avoid that at all costs. Then we must begin all over again from another starting point and travel to another road. What kind of road must this be? We have to bring in some pleasant stories, myths. I'm trying to highlight the word stories. That may be there. All right, we have to bring in some pleasant stories to relieve the strain. Now there is a mass of ancient legend, a part of which we must now use for our purposes. After that, we must go on as before, dividing always and choosing one part only until we arrive at the summit of our climb and the object of our journey. Shall we begin? Okay, and that begins then the next leg of this dialogue, and I will be picking that up from next week, and I do hope you'll join me for that because that is a really key part of this dialogue. So this was the whole setup, but now we're going to get into the dialogue proper. So I hope that you are finding this dialogue interesting, a curious one certainly, and if you have any questions or comments, feel free to put those below. And as always, thank you for watching. Till next time.